They say a secret weighs less in the dark. Maybe that's why I always preferred the night. The city of Cairo never truly sleeps. It hums like a tired prayer refusing to die. From my window, I used to watch the river shimmer between streetlights and wonder how many sins were washed away in its current. You can't hear your conscience when car horns and muezzins echo at the same time. You can only feel the pulse of survival. Every night before leaving home, I stood before the mirror. The woman staring back was not the teacher who scolded children for lying, who quoted Qur'anic verses about honesty and self-respect. She was someone else, older, sharper, wearing perfume she couldn't pronounce. Each time I told myself, just one more night, for my son, for school fees, for food. But the truth? You don't fall all at once. You slip, one compromise at a time, until the floor becomes a graveyard for every version of who you were. I was born in Mansoura, in a house that smelled of chalk and soap. My father, a literature teacher, spoke to me in verses. He believed that words could save a person, that if you could read enough poetry, you'd never commit a crime. My mother, a hospital nurse, spoke less, but lived like scripture. She cleaned the bodies of the dead before burial, whispering prayers that made me believe even silence had faith. They named me Layla, after the night. Because the night hides the wounds of the world, my mother said. For years I believed her, that darkness could be merciful. At 20, I followed my father's footsteps and became a teacher. Not because it was glamorous, but because it was the only job left that still carried honor in a country where everything else was for sale. My students called me Miss Layla, though some whispered the strict one. I wore long dresses, tied my hair neatly, and wrote the word virtue in big letters on the board every Monday. In those years, I felt untouchable, a woman of principle, a guardian of right and wrong. If someone had told me then what I would become, I would have slapped them. The fall didn't start with greed. It started with love, or what I thought was love. My husband, Khalid, was a mechanic with soft hands and sharper dreams. He promised stability, a home, a shared faith in tomorrow. But Cairo's rent was higher than his salary, and his patience was shorter than his temper. When I gave birth to our son, Omar, I thought it would anchor us. Instead, it broke us apart. He left one morning without a fight, without a word, only a letter under the sugar bowl. Forgive me, Layla. I can't be the man you need. I read it again and again until the words lost meaning. I threw it away, but found myself searching the trash hours later, as if one more look would reveal a secret code for why love runs out. From then on, I carried everything alone. Omar's school fees, rent, food, books. I took extra classes, tutored late, sold my jewelry, even translated textbooks for a neighbor. But Egypt doesn't forgive women who try too hard. The bills outgrew the months. Some nights, when Omar was asleep, I'd sit by the window, watching the faint light of the mosque minaret. I'd whisper to God, half prayer, half accusation. Why must decency be punished? There was no answer. Only the hum of the city and my own heartbeat counting debts. It was Rasha who lit the first match. She had been my colleague once, a literature teacher too, though she had since quit. When she walked into my classroom that day, years later, she looked like a promise the world had kept. Perfect hair, a gold bracelet, and confidence that didn't apologize. "Layla," she said, smiling, "you still smell like chalk dust." We went to a cafe, and she told me she now worked as an event hostess. "You meet men from embassies, companies," she explained. "They just want company. Nothing improper, unless you choose." I laughed then. "Rasha, please. I teach moral philosophy to 12-year-olds. She smiled, stirring her coffee. "And yet, you can't afford your son's tuition." The sentence stung more than I expected. She slid an envelope across the table. Crisp notes. More than I earned in a month. "Just for tonight," she whispered. "You only have to talk." I didn't take the money. Not then. But that night, lying in bed beside my sleeping son, I thought of Rasha's perfume, her car, the way waiters treated her with quiet respect. I told myself I wasn't envious, but envy wears many disguises. Mine looked like survival. In class, I continued teaching morality. "Every wrong choice begins as a small excuse," I told my students, hearing my own hypocrisy echo across the room. One boy asked, "Miss, what if you make a mistake for a good reason?" I froze. Every child's question is a mirror. Some just show too much. That evening, I opened my wardrobe, touched the single nice dress I owned, navy blue, worn once at a wedding. I thought of Rasha's words again. Just talk. Just one night. I don't know what I expected. Perhaps shame to stop me, or faith to speak louder. Neither did. I called Rasha the next morning. The first time was almost ordinary. A hotel downtown, polished marble, music whispering through hidden speakers. Rasha handed me a silk scarf and said, "Don't look nervous. They smell guilt faster than perfume." The man waiting for me was older, gentle, with kind eyes that carried boredom. He spoke about politics, architecture, his loneliness. I nodded, laughed when I should, sipped orange juice slowly. He gave me an envelope at the end of the evening. No words, no promises. I told myself it was just conversation, that my dignity was still intact, that I was, in some twisted logic, performing charity. But when I walked home past the mosque, I avoided looking at it. The next morning, in class, my students read a poem by Ahmed Shawki. "Nations are only moral as long as they value virtue." I made them repeat the line twice, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. That night, I hid the envelope inside an old literature book. I didn't open it again until rent day. When I did, the guilt felt lighter than I expected. Money has a way of numbing shame. I told myself, it's just one time. Then, once became twice. Then twice became habit. Each night, I became a version of myself I didn't recognize, freer, colder, and strangely alive. They say the devil doesn't appear with horns. He comes dressed as a solution. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was already part of me. The line I had sworn never to cross was behind me now, blurred, and fading with distance. Still, Each morning I returned to the classroom, smiling, correcting essays on ethics, pretending I hadn't bartered my own. And yet, in those quiet moments before class began, when the sunlight hit the chalkboard just right, I sometimes whispered to myself, almost tenderly, "Layla, how far will you go to stay alive?" The first lie I told myself was simple. I'm doing this for Omar. That single sentence became my armor. Thin, flexible, dangerously comforting. In the beginning, I believed I could control it. I accepted only a few clients, always through Rasha, always under a fake name. She called me Mira. I used to laugh when she said it. Mira, meaning look. How fitting, I thought later, that my disguise was built from the act of being seen. Every night I rehearsed my lines. Soft laughter, curiosity, silence at the right moments. I learned that men don't really want company. They want confirmation. They want someone to nod at their stories, to make their lies sound noble. And I was a teacher. I knew how to make people feel right, even when they were wrong. The first few weeks, I treated it like a second job, one that required costume and detachment. By day, I taught ethics and literature. By night, I performed survival in silk. I learned to compartmentalize, to switch voices the way others change clothes. In my purse, two things always sat side by side: my Quran and my lipstick. When I came home after those nights, I often stood at Omar's door and listened to him breathe. His room was lined with comic books and school medals. Sometimes, I imagined telling him the truth, that his mother was doing what she must. But the words died before they reached my lips. Instead, I kissed his forehead and whispered the same prayer my mother used to say to me: God, protect him from what he does not understand. I convinced myself that I was still moral, that sin had tiers and mine sat low on the ladder. After all, I wasn't stealing. I wasn't hurting anyone. But morality isn't a staircase. It's a mirror. The more I looked away, the less of myself I recognized. There was the architect, kind, quiet, full of stories about cities he'd never finish. The businessman, who paid extra just to talk about his dead wife. And the judge, who once lectured me about corruption in education while his hand rested on my knee. Each of them confessed something: a failure, a wound, a fear. I became their priestess, their therapist, their silent proof that they were still desirable, still powerful. One night, the judge asked, "Do you ever feel guilty, Mira?" I smiled, the way women do when they're asked to lie beautifully. "Not as much as I should." He laughed. But I didn't. As months passed, I began to enjoy the in-between moments. The way heads turned when I entered a lobby. The smell of new perfume mixing with the Cairo night. The luxury of being wanted. It wasn't about flesh. It was about control. At school, I had none. The principal cut salaries without warning. Parents scolded teachers as if we were servants. But in those hotel rooms, for a few hours, I was untouchable. I started buying better clothes, shoes that clicked like punctuation marks. I told myself it was for confidence, for appearance. But deep down, it was vanity. The old hunger that had slept inside me finally learning to stand. When I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror, I sometimes whispered, "You survived." but some nights it sounded more like, "You've surrendered." One Friday, my neighbor, an old woman named Tariq, asked me to accompany her to the mosque. She said, "You always look tired, Layla. Come clear your heart." I went. Maybe out of guilt, maybe nostalgia. Inside, the Imam spoke of honesty and self-deception, how humans build palaces of lies around their shame until the truth suffocates inside. I remember the smell of incense, the murmured prayers, and the way my knees trembled during sujud. For a moment, I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just stayed still, a ghost among the faithful. When we left, Tariq said, "You seem lighter, my dear." I nodded, though something heavier had settled in my chest. That night, I worked again. The man asked me what I did for a living. "I teach morality," I said without thinking. He laughed. I laughed too, but it hurt somewhere behind my ribs. By the second year, I could no longer separate the two worlds. The hotel perfume followed me to class. The chalk dust clung to my clothes at night. I began forgetting lesson plans, arriving late, staring blankly at papers I used to grade with passion. When students misbehaved, I didn't scold them. I envied their innocence. One afternoon, a student named Yusuf stayed after class. He was bright, polite, always first to answer. "Miss Layla," he said, "you look sad lately." I smiled. "Teachers don't get sad, Yusuf. We get tired." He looked unconvinced. "You always tell us to face truth, even when it hurts." That line, "even when it hurts," haunted me for nights. Because I knew, one day, the truth would hurt him too. The first time I thought someone recognized me, it felt like drowning. It happened in a lobby. I was meeting a client when a waiter looked at me too long. His eyes flickered with memory. I paid the bill and fled before dessert arrived. After that, paranoia grew roots. I started using different hotels, changing my hair, lowering my voice. Every glance felt like accusation, every mirror like a witness. Still, I couldn't stop. The money wasn't the chain anymore. It was the illusion of choice. Each night, I promised myself it was the last. Each dawn, I justified one more. There's a part of Cairo, near Zamalek, where the river catches the moon just right. That's where I often waited between clients, sitting by the water, removing my heels, feeling the ground. The wind there carries everything: the smoke, the prayers, the laughter from passing boats. Sometimes I'd whisper to the river, "Do you forgive what we wash into you?" It never answered, but I liked pretending it did. Once, a boy selling roses approached me. "For you, madam." "You look like someone waiting for love." I bought one, though I wasn't waiting for love anymore. I was waiting for an ending. The true turning point wasn't a scandal or a revelation. It was a mirror. One morning, I caught my reflection in the school restroom. No makeup, tired eyes, faint red mark on my neck from the night before. The fluorescent light was merciless. For a moment, I saw both women at once. Layla the teacher, and Mira the lie. They looked nothing alike. I realized I no longer knew which one of them prayed and which one pretended to. That day, I didn't go home after class. I walked to the mosque again and sat outside, not entering, just listening. Children played nearby, reciting verses half correctly, laughing between mistakes. Their joy made me ache. When I finally stood up, I told myself I could still go back, that redemption was just one step in the right direction. But I didn't take that step. Not yet. Because the next call from Russia came with double the pay, and Omar's school sent another overdue notice. From there, everything became rhythm. Teach, hide, lie, repeat. Even guilt lost its sting. I began to see myself as two people living under one name. The daytime Layla wore decency like armor. The nighttime Layla wore desire like confession. When Russia asked if I was still okay, I said, "It's only wrong if I get caught." We both laughed. Neither of us meant it. There were rumors about other teachers being involved, whispers of a circle catering to wealthy clients. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. By now, I had mastered silence. The kind that keeps you alive. The kind that kills you slowly. In the beginning, I had pitied women like me, those who lived two lives. Now I understood the truth. We weren't immoral. We were exhausted. But exhaustion doesn't excuse betrayal. Each night before bed, I looked at my son's photo on the wall, his small smile, his missing tooth, and whispered, "One day you'll know everything, Omar. But I hope you never know why." Then I'd switch off the light, the same way I switched off my conscience. Gently, almost kindly. The city has a way of rewarding sin if you perform it gracefully. By the third year, I no longer walked. I glided. My heels tapped through marble lobbies like punctuation marks to a script I had learned too well. I knew which perfume lingered longer in a man's memory, which tone of laughter promised intimacy without surrender. And I had learned to forget. Not in the way memory fades, but in the way survival demands. Russia used to say, "In Cairo, virtue is a luxury for those who can afford it." I used to nod, but somewhere deep inside, I feared she was right. Every evening I transformed in silence. The transformation was a ceremony, a shower that erased the day's chalk dust, lotion that smelled like foreign summers, red lipstick that made my reflection look braver. I would stand in front of the mirror and whisper, "Tonight, you are no one." Because anonymity was freedom. Because Mira could sin without consequence, while Layla still lectured about ethics to wide-eyed children. I started arriving early to appointments, not because I was eager, but because I liked the quiet before performance. The sound of my own pulse echoing in my ears like a drumbeat of defiance. One night, I caught my reflection in the mirrored elevator. Silk dress, diamond earrings, hair loose. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I had become exactly what men imagined I could be. Each client was a study in contradiction. There was Hassan, the diplomat, who quoted the Quran between drinks and called me a necessary sin. There was Samir, the journalist, who said he admired my intellect and asked if I ever felt trapped, even as he held me by the wrist. And there was Mahmoud, the architect from before, who returned, now married, now guiltier. He told me, "You make me feel human again." I wanted to ask, and what does that make me? but I didn't. I just smiled and let him believe his illusion. Because that's what I had become, a vessel for other people's repentance. There was one night I'll never forget, not because it was worse than others, but because it was perfect. The man had sent a car. When I arrived, the room was lit only by candles, the air thick with jasmine. He handed me a single rose and said, "You deserve beauty." We talked for hours about books, childhood, fear. He told me he once dreamed of being a teacher. I laughed, almost choking on irony. When I left, he pressed the rose into my hand. It wilted by morning. That day, during class, I found myself drawing a rose on the chalkboard absent-mindedly. Yusef asked, "Miss, are we doing art today?" I said no and quickly erased it, chalk dust blooming like smoke. That's when I realized, even beauty had started to feel dirty. Sin, once tasted, becomes less about pleasure and more about control. In those hotel rooms, I was the one writing the rules. I could choose what to say, when to smile, when to leave. I could make powerful men hesitate with a single look. For someone who had spent years being invisible, it felt intoxicating. But power, like perfume, fades quickly. The moment I stepped outside, it evaporated, leaving only the scent of guilt behind. There were nights when I stood by my window, money spread across the table, and whispered, "Is this what freedom feels like?" The silence always answered, "No. This is what emptiness feels like." It happened one Friday night at a hotel in Garden City. I walked into the lobby, confident, calm, until I saw him, Yusef. He stood beside a man I recognized too, one of my regular clients, his father. The world froze. Yusef's eyes widened. The recognition was instant, not from my face, but from the scar on my hand, the same one he once asked about in class. Neither of us spoke. The father turned, smiling, oblivious. "Mira, this is my son. He just finished his exams. Brilliant boy." Yusef didn't move. His gaze was pure betrayal, but it wasn't anger I saw. It was disbelief, heartbreak. The kind of pain that makes innocence bleed. I nodded, whispered something meaningless, and excused myself. My legs barely carried me out. In the elevator, I pressed the button again and again, desperate for the doors to close, as if metal could protect me from what I had just destroyed. That night, I couldn't breathe. I locked myself in the bathroom, stripped off my clothes, and stared at the mirror, at the scar, the painted lips, the trembling hands. I thought of Yusef's face, the way his eyes had asked the question he could never say aloud. Why? I vomited until nothing was left. Then I sat on the cold tiles, shaking, whispering prayers that didn't sound like prayers anymore. At dawn, I opened the window and watched Cairo wake up. The muezzin's call echoed through the mist, slow, mournful. I had taught my students that the call to prayer meant return to what is pure, but I didn't know how to return. The next morning, I went to school as usual. My steps felt heavier than the sun. Yusef was there, silent, eyes fixed on the board. During break, he left a folded note on my desk. It said only, "You lied to us." I didn't cry. I just stared at the words until they blurred. That afternoon, the principal called me in. "Layla," he said, voice low, "parents have been talking. A student saw you. You must resign quietly." He pushed an envelope across the desk. Severance pay. A bribe for silence. The same gesture I had once accepted from strangers, now mirrored by the institution I once served. I walked out without looking back. By evening, the phone had stopped ringing. Rasha's number no longer worked. The hotel managers pretended not to recognize me. In a city built on secrets, mine had finally expired. At home, Omar waited by the door, holding his backpack. "Why are they saying things about you at school, Mama?" My throat burned. "What things?" "That you go to hotels. That you're—" He stopped. I saw the word die on his tongue. He looked at me, searching for truth. I had taught him that truth makes you free, so I tried. I made mistakes, Omar. For you. For us. He shook his head slowly. "Did you ever teach me a truth?" Then he walked into his room and closed the door. The sound of that latch, that soft, final click, was louder than any slap, any sermon. The days blurred. I stopped going out. Bills piled up, unpaid. The rose from that perfect night turned brown on the windowsill. I no longer wore perfume. The mirror gathered dust. Sometimes I walked to the Nile, watching families laugh, couples argue, fishermen cast nets into the muddy current. I wanted to tell them all, "Be careful what you sell to survive. The soul doesn't buy itself back." But I said nothing, because I knew they wouldn't listen. Because once, neither did I. People think sin destroys you quickly, that one act of shame ends everything. But that's not true. Sin doesn't burn, it rots. Slowly, sweetly. It sings you lullabies while it eats your voice. And when you finally realize what you've become, it's not fire you feel, it's silence. A silence so thick it drowns even prayer. Silence is heavier than judgment. After the school scandal, Cairo stopped feeling like home. Every street corner seemed to whisper my name. Every shadow looked familiar. I began walking with my head down, as if the pavement itself could swallow my shame. I moved to a smaller flat on the edge of Giza, a single room, one window, a kitchen sink that coughed instead of ran. I told myself it was temporary, just until things calmed. But deep down, I knew nothing ever calms for women like me. I stopped answering the phone. Most calls were from numbers I didn't know, men asking if Mira was still available. I threw the SIM card away. The silence afterward was unbearable, but it was mine. Omar had gone to live with my sister, Hiba, in Alexandria. She told me gently, "He needs space, Layla. He's angry, but he's young. He'll forgive." Forgive. Such an easy word, such an impossible act. Days passed in monotony. Prayer I couldn't finish, food I didn't taste, air I didn't trust. I slept in daylight, stayed awake at night. The world felt reversed, like punishment for pretending to live two lives. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering to the walls. "You're still here," I'd say, as if reminding myself I hadn't evaporated. I found an old stack of graded papers from my students, neat handwriting, red ink. Yusef's essay was among them. The title, "Truth is the Hardest Word to Speak." I read it twice. The irony sliced through me like broken glass. One night I took all the leftover money, the stained savings from the past years, and spread it across the bed. Bills like confessions. I thought of everything that money had bought. Medicine, school shoes, groceries, shame. Then I set one note on fire. The flame curled fast, orange eating green, until only ash remained. The room smelled like regret and smoke. Weeks later, Rasha called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity is cruel. Layla, she said, voice trembling. They're shutting down everything. The network. The hotels are tightening. Someone was arrested. I said nothing. I'm sorry, she added. I never meant for you to get caught. You were too pure for this. I laughed. It came out dry, bitter. Too pure, Rasha? Purity is for girls who can afford mistakes. She was silent for a moment, then whispered, You could leave. New city, new name. You still have beauty. Beauty doesn't erase ghosts, I said, and I hung up. That night, I dreamed of my father's voice, calm, disappointed. You can't teach virtue from a cracked soul. When I woke, I was crying without sound. A week later, Omar came. He was taller now, older. His eyes held a maturity I hadn't earned the right to see. He didn't hug me. He just stood at the door, holding a plastic bag with groceries. I came because Aunt Hiba said you were sick, he said. I smiled weakly. I'm fine. He looked around the room, the dim light, the cracked paint, the smell of burnt incense. This is how you live now? It's enough. He sat down, quiet for a while, then, almost whispering, Did you love him? I froze. Who? The man everyone talked about. The student's father. I wanted to lie, but my throat wouldn't move. No, I said finally. Not him. Not anyone. Then why? Because I was tired of losing. He stared at me for a long time, then said softly, You didn't just lose, Mama. You left. When he left again that evening, I felt something break. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. Like the quiet snap of a string inside the chest. After that, I stopped pretending to be strong. I didn't eat, I didn't bathe. The days bled together, nameless, scentless, endless. My body felt heavier each morning, as if shame had gained weight overnight. Once I walked to the mosque at dawn. I didn't go inside, I just sat on the steps and watched people pray. I wanted to join, but every time I tried, my knees locked. It felt like I didn't deserve to kneel. That's when I realized my punishment wasn't divine, it was internal. God didn't need to condemn me. I had already done it myself. In the quiet, I started writing letters I'd never send. To Yusuf, to Omar, to the women I once judged. To God. Dear Yusuf, you were my best student. You saw the truth before I did. I'm sorry I made you lose faith in teachers, in women, in goodness. You will meet others who lie less beautifully than I did. Trust them. Don't let my shadow follow you. Dear Omar, I wanted to build you a world without hunger, but I fed you shame instead. One day, when you have a family, remember, love doesn't excuse deception. It survives through it. Dear God, if forgiveness is real, don't give it easily. Make me earn it. Let every breath be the price of returning. The pages filled, one after another, until my hand cramped. Writing didn't redeem me, but it stopped the silence from devouring me whole. Rasha called again months later. There's someone who can help, she said. A client who still asks about you. He said he'll pay well if you come back. Just one night, I almost said yes. The hunger, the loneliness, the exhaustion, they all screamed yes. But something inside me, fragile, stubborn, whispered no. No, Rasha. Not again. She sighed. Then what will you do? I looked at the cracked wall, the pile of unpaid bills, the wilted rose on the windowsill. I'll start over, I said. Even if it's from nothing. Rasha didn't reply. The line went dead. That night, I sat by the window and let the city noise fill the room. The horns, the laughter, the echoes of life continuing without me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to hide. A week later, a small envelope arrived. No sender. Inside, a folded sheet of paper. It was Yusef's handwriting. Miss Layla, I don't know if I should forgive you, but I remember your lessons. You once said, the hardest courage is facing the truth after it ruins you. I think you were already trying to teach us this, even if you didn't mean to. I hope you're okay. I stared at the paper for hours. My chest ached, not with guilt this time, but something gentler, almost human. It was the first kindness I'd received in a year. That night, the wind howled through the cracks of the window. I thought of everything I'd lost, reputation, family, faith. But I also thought of everything I could still choose. The Quran on the shelf, the pen on the table, the breath in my lungs. Maybe redemption wasn't about being pure again. Maybe it was about not surrendering to filth forever. So I did the only thing I could. I prayed. Not properly, not eloquently, just words, broken and uneven, falling from my mouth like sand. God, if you're still listening, don't cleanse me. Just let me live with what I've done without hating who I am. And for a moment, I thought I felt warmth, not outside, but within. People imagine collapse as noise, shouting, chaos, destruction. But mine came quietly. No one witnessed it, no cameras, no tears. Just a woman sitting alone, whispering apologies into the dark. That's the truth of moral ruin. It doesn't kill you. It leaves you breathing, so you can hear every echo of who you used to be. Confession doesn't always happen inside a mosque. Sometimes it happens in the space between two breaths, when silence forces you to listen to yourself. Months passed like blurred pages. I began to live slower, smaller. My hands shook when I boiled water. My eyes hurt when I saw light. The body forgets comfort faster than the soul forgets guilt. But guilt, I learned, is a strange teacher. It doesn't punish, it repeats. One morning, I woke to the sound of children outside. Laughter, running feet, the same chaos I used to control in my classroom. I opened the window and watched them. Their voices rose like birds. Something in me cracked open. I missed teaching. Not the salary, not the authority, but the rhythm of giving, of being part of something clean. That afternoon, I walked to a literacy center in Mbaba, a small, crowded room where women learn to read. The walls were yellowed with age, and the blackboard was cracked, but it smelled of effort. I asked the coordinator if they needed help. She looked me up and down. Old clothes, tired eyes, the residue of shame still visible, and nodded. "We always need help," she said. That night, I slept for the first time without hearing echoes. They came from everywhere: widows, cleaners, women who'd lost husbands to accidents or migration. Some couldn't write their own names. Others just wanted to read the labels on medicine bottles. Their stories spilled like secrets between lessons. One had sold jewelry to pay for her son's visa. Another worked 3 jobs to keep her daughter in school. One evening, a woman named Fatma asked me, "Miss, do you think God forgives women like us?" I paused. For what? For everything we do because no one else helps. I didn't have an answer. But that night, when I looked in the mirror, I realized I was one of them. Not a sinner above them, not a savior below them. Just another woman trying not to drown in her own necessity. At first, I hid my past from them. I told them I was a retired teacher, nothing more. But secrets have a scent, and pain recognizes its own. One night, after class, Fatma stayed behind. "You used to be someone else," she said quietly. "Your eyes still teach, but your silence, that's guilt." I almost denied it, but something about her tone, not accusing, just knowing, made me nod. "Yes," I said, "I've been many people, and I've failed most of them." She touched my hand. "Then teach us how to start again." That sentence became my redemption. I began praying again, not out of duty, but out of longing. My prayers were clumsy, unpolished. I stopped asking for forgiveness. Instead, I prayed for endurance, for the strength to live with memory without letting it poison me. At the mosque, I sat at the back, away from others. The imam's voice one evening struck through me. God's mercy is not a gift for the perfect. It is the shelter for those who stop running. I went home and wrote in my notebook, maybe redemption isn't a door. Maybe it's a pause, a space where guilt and grace can sit in the same room. Months later, Yusuf came. He stood in the doorway of the literacy center, taller, older, dressed neatly. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He said, "I heard you're teaching again." "Yes," I whispered. "In a way." He nodded. "I wanted to see if it was true, that you're helping those women." "They help me more," I said. He hesitated. Then, almost like a child, "I don't hate you anymore, miss." Tears rose, but I smiled. That's too much kindness for someone who lied to you. He looked at me, eyes steady. "Maybe. But you told us once that truth is only real if it costs something. I think you paid enough." Then he left. Just like that. No grand forgiveness, no dramatic closure. Only peace, quiet and soft, entering like dawn through the window. That night, I went home and sat by the window again. The same one where I once whispered to the Nile. The air smelled of dust and bread. I whispered, "I'm still here." And for the first time, it didn't sound like a punishment. Confession isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning how to live beside it, without letting it own your name. I had carried shame like armor for years, but that night I realized armor also keeps love out. So I opened the window wider and let the city noise in. Children, horns, prayers, laughter. Life. I was no longer Mira. Not quite the old Layla either. Just a woman who had finally stopped pretending to be clean. and started learning to be honest. You don't walk back to yourself in a straight line. You circle. You pause. You wait for the breath that doesn't hurt. I kept teaching at the literacy center. Weeks layered into months. The women learned to sign their names, to read bus signs, to understand prescriptions without asking for help. On the day Fatma read a children's story aloud for the first time without stumbling, she cried and laughed at once. "Now my daughter won't have to read to me," she said. "I can be the mother again." I nodded, as if I understood completely. But the truth was softer, messier. Sometimes children must lead us home. I started writing lesson plans again, small ones, neat, careful. Not about lofty ethics, not about grand virtue. Just sentences that could hold. Say what you mean. Keep what you promise. Ask for help before it's too late. I taped them above my kitchen sink like prayers that had learned to live with dishes and steam. On a quiet afternoon, Hiba called. "He's ready," she said. "Come for tea." I took the afternoon train to Alexandria, the city rinsed in salt and light. When I stepped into her apartment, I smelled mint, sugar, cardamom. Omar stood by the balcony, taller than memory, face gentler than the last time. He didn't rush to me, and I didn't expect him to. We stood in that careful distance mothers know, love shaped like a question. "Would you like tea?" he asked. "I would," I said. "Thank you." We sat. We did not speak of hotels, of notes, of whispers in school corridors. He asked about the literacy center. I told him about the women and their first signatures, the way their hands shook as if writing themselves into the world for the first time. He smiled at that, an honest, small smile, like a door opening without sound. "Do you still keep your old students' papers?" he asked suddenly. "I do," I said, "even the ones that hurt." He looked down at his tea. "I kept your voice," he said. "When I study late, I still hear you saying, 'Truth first, then the rest.'" I couldn't stop the tears. They rose without drama, without apologies. He didn't look away. "I can't ask you to forgive me," I said. "It would be selfish." He shook his head. "It's not about forgiveness anymore. It's about whether we can tell the same story without lying to each other." We sat with that. The room hummed, the fan, the city, the ocean far off. We were not healed, not restored to some fantasy of before. But the thread was back between us, fragile and real, and it did not snap when the silence pulled on it. "Will you come again next week?" he asked. "If you want me to." "I do." I walked to the station at dusk. The sea wind carried the salt of everything that had ever happened and could never be undone. I thought of the women at the center, of Yusef's letter, of my father's chalk, my mother's hospital soap. Every old life was still inside me, but none of them were steering anymore. I bought a single rose from a boy at the corner, a habit that once meant performance, and laid it on the bench at the platform without keeping it. Beauty, I decided, did not have to be mine to prove I was alive. Back in Cairo, I asked the center's coordinator if I could start an evening class for teenagers who were behind in school. "You know how to keep a room," she said. "Do it." The first night, 5 showed up, shoulders high with embarrassment. I kept the lights softer than classrooms usually allow. I wrote a sentence on the board. Write the truth you can handle today. They stared at it, puzzled, as if it were a trick. It wasn't. Some wrote about soccer. One wrote about missing her mother who cleaned offices at night. A boy wrote 3 words, "I am trying," then put down his pen. I told him that was enough for a first lesson. He looked at me like I had handed him a secret. On Fridays, I returned to the mosque. I still stood in the back. I still prayed clumsily. But the words felt less like petitions and more like the language of a country I had moved back to. Accented, incomplete, but spoken without fear. When the imam spoke about mercy, I didn't imagine it descending like light to erase me. I imagined it as a chair in a small kitchen where a tired woman could sit and breathe without performing goodness for anyone. One evening, as the sun sank and Cairo colored itself in rust and gold, I walked along the Nile. The water looked like a blackboard wiped clean and still damp. A girl passed me, laughing, a book under her arm. A man argued gently into his phone. A mother braided her daughter's hair on a low wall and tied the end with a ribbon that did not match. Beauty assembled from what life had left. I whispered to the river, a habit that had outlived shame. I'm still here. This time, the city answered in ordinary ways. A boat horn, a call to prayer, sandals slapping stone. Enough. At home, I opened my notebook and wrote a final lesson plan, the only one I knew I could keep. Start small. Tell the truth you can carry. Return what isn't yours, the lies, the roles, the borrowed names. Teach from scars, not from mirrors. Leave the window open. I taped it above the sink, beside the others. Then I washed the cups, one by one, the water finally running clear. In bed, the apartment humming around me, I thought of the classroom I once ruled, and the rooms where I learned to disappear. I thought of Omar's cautious tea, and Yusef's careful mercy, and Fatma sounding out the word mother, as if it had been waiting for her in the dark all along. I did not promise myself a new life. I promised a better ordinary. Before sleep, I practiced the lecture I would give the teenagers on Monday. A lecture with no sermon, no mask. There are 2 lives in each of us, the one that wants to be good and the one that wants to be safe. Some days they disagree. On those days, don't choose glory. Choose honesty. It costs less to keep. If you fall, return. If you can't return, stop running. Someone will meet you where you are, even if that someone is only the future you. I switched off the light. The room kept breathing. Outside, Cairo shrugged into night, and the river wrote its slow black sentence toward morning. No applause, no absolution. Just a quiet place to begin again. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like grace.